The Fantastic Four is one of the most beloved teams in Marvel Comics, but their attempts on the big screen have not had the same reputation. Today we're going to discuss why this is the case and how first steps can fix this problem. What's up guys, welcome to the channel. My name is Nick, and today we're going to be discussing the problems with the Fantastic Four films and how first steps can fix this problem and become the best one we've ever gotten. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to help this channel out. Hopefully I can earn your subscription so we can grow. And without further ado, let's get started. So the very first Fantastic Four film was released in 1994, but was it released? This film was actually never intended to be shown to the public and was only made to keep the film rights to the Fantastic Four. Now, the film was only made with $1 million, which makes sense because if you're trying to keep the rights to something, you probably don't have that much money to begin with. And also, if you don't want this movie to be seen by the public at all, then you probably don't want to pour that much money into it. Along with the $1 million budget, they also brought in Roger Corman to produce this film alongside of other people. Now, the actual product of this movie is very, very, very low quality. The movie looks like it was shot with a home video, like camcorder, and the composition just is dreadful to look at. And the visual effects you'd expect not to be that great due to the budget and the production time frame, which was only 3 weeks of shooting. You would think that the effects just wouldn't look good with how rushed everything was going, but the thing honestly looks decent enough, and some visuals are fine, but for the most part, this movie just does not look good at all. You also just couldn't feel any passion in the filmmaking whatsoever from the directing, which has a very bland style to it, and the performances just don't really evoke anything, with the exception of maybe Michael Bailey Smith as the Thing, but for the most part you just get a lot of blank expressions and corny line delivery. And the family dynamics are one of the key elements to making Fantastic Four work, and they just feel very absent here, where we don't really build up to those family moments and they force in Reed and Sue's relationship, which feels kind of weird with how they set up the origin for both characters. So all of that just feels shoehorned in just to get the points they need and the big plot points from the comics. And then we have Dr. Doom, who lacks all the dread and formidability that makes him such a strong and compelling villain, to where he's just a mustache twirling, turns their chair around to say something evil in a Saturday morning cartoon kind of villain. So just all of the elements feel very disappointing around him. And it's very unfortunate how the fallout of this film ended up becoming, because this was supposed to have a world premiere in the Mall of America in Minnesota, and everything was getting set up, the actors were ready and everything, and then just very last minute they pull the plug on the project and say, hey, this movie is not going to be released at all, thank you for your time, but we're never showing this to anyone, which they should have handled that so much better. And it's very distasteful to me how they handled that, especially for the crew members that were unaware of how this was all turning out. And Stan Lee confirmed that that was always the plan, to where they just weren't going to release this and it was only made to keep the rights. So that explains a lot of why there just isn't much passion and why this is a very low quality film. And that leads us into the next film that was released for these characters, which is Fantastic Four from 2005. Now, we are seeing a lot of revisionists around this film start turning around and saying that the film is quite enjoyable and it is decent enough as its own, which I don't want to take that away from anyone. I just want to get this out there. I don't like this movie, but if you have nostalgia for this film or you still get like a guilty pleasure experience out of that, I don't want to take that away from you. I don't want to take any emotional connection for it. Now, the cast for this film I do think has potential, where Chris Evans and Michael Chiklis are honestly like solid as Johnny and Ben, and the two of them have a lot of scenes that work well. But I feel like everyone was just trapped in a very conventional and corny script, where we have a lot of awkward and obvious dialogue where they're forcing in foreshadowing of what their powers are going to be with subtle jokes, like Reed is always stretching to find conclusions, like haha, we get it, he's going to be stretchy and like Stretch Armstrong live action. But we get a lot of telling instead of showing as well. And then the origin I think is very rushed, where we don't really settle down with the characters enough to have the big moment where they all get their powers, have a lot of real value to it, where you don't feel the shock and you don't feel the urgency to figure out what is going on. You just see 4 people go up to space and this team has a very bad experience up there. So I wish we could have had more emotional connection to that moment. And they also do a thing where they try to establish the powers as metaphors for what each character is struggling with and needs to overcome. Like Ben needs to love himself on the inside and becomes the Thing, which hurts that. Johnny is a very hot-headed narcissist, so he has to cool down, and he's the Human Torch. Sue wants to be seen, and she turns invisible for her powers, and Reed needs to be more flexible, and he becomes stretchy. So they try to do stuff like that, but I don't think they dive deep enough into that throughout the rest of the film. And then you have Doctor Doom, who I think is handled very poorly here, where we don't really establish enough connection between him and the Fantastic Four to really create a very threatening presence for him. One thing the movie does that I think is interesting is put green lighting around when Doom is either in the scene or his presence is controlling the environment the characters are in. I think that's an interesting detail, but I just wish the actual writing for the character could have conveyed more threat around him being there and connect these two and their conflicting plots together for most of the film. Now, the tone of the film decides to go very playful, comic booky, cartoonish 2000s comedy vibes, which that kind of nails what the Fantastic Four is, very silly and out there, but they don't really handle much of the emotion well, where it ends up being very sappy. So the heartfelt side of the Fantastic Four just feels very left out. And any serious moments like Ben with his wife feel sappy and not really interesting enough, but then other parts that could really show humanity in Ben, like when he has to save the guy from jumping off the bridge, that's played off more of as a joke rather than having a very nice moment of Ben helping someone out in the midst of him having a lot of doubt around himself. I think that this movie is quick enough moving to where you're not really checking the runtime at all. It moves fast and it is entertaining enough, so I do give it credit that it isn't an offensive watch at all. It is a harmless, inoffensive superhero film from the 2000s, but being regarded as the best Fantastic Four movie that we have as of now before First Steps comes out, it's kind of sad to think about it because a guilty pleasure film isn't enough to me to be known as the best one. So I find that a little disappointing, but it's still enjoyable enough. And if you have nostalgia, I think that's cool, but I don't think this movie is very good and has a lot of flaws. And now we get into the sequel to that film, Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. Now, unfortunately, I think this falls victim to a lot of the same issues as its predecessor, and in a sense, even more so. I think the tone is even cringier and has worse delivery and execution, and Doctor Doom in this movie is so unnecessary and forced in to where it just feels like a roadblock to get to the actual story that we want to see, Galactus almost destroying the planet. Now, they try to connect Doom to Silver Surfer and Galactus a bit throughout all of it, but it just feels shoehorned and unnatural. And we don't really get a strong enough motive out of Doctor Doom besides the writers basically just saying, yeah, it's Doctor Doom, he's evil, I hope you guys roll with it and enjoy his presence here. But I just don't think it has the same impact as the first film, which I don't even think had that much impact to begin with. So he just feels like an unnecessary, familiar face they tacked onto this to get people back into it. And then we have the infamous Galactus Cloud, which is hilariously just awful. And it is funny to look at that the first time we see Galactus on the big screen is him as a cloud. But because of that, we just don't have any stakes, and it leads to a very emotionally flat ending where you would hope that an end-of-the-world storyline would feel more emotion and heavy-hitting moments, but it just feels very flat when you get to the end. And Silver Surfer is just bland throughout a lot of it and feels more like a plot device to get to the ending rather than a full-fledged character, which is unfortunate because we do have a lot of good moments between him and Sue that adds to the emotional depth of Silver Surfer, but I think those were just not explored enough. And I do think this movie is a frustrating watch because I think there is potential for something interesting here, but it just falls victim to poor writing and bland direction. I think the idea of having the Fantastic Four deal with celebrity after the first film and having themselves in the limelight while Reed and Sue want to settle down and get married, I think that's a very interesting direction to take to show the characters going through all of that, which I don't think it goes in deeper enough into what we could have gotten from Reed and Sue's relationship. And then Johnny, I feel like, is borderline insufferable in some parts, but then funny in others. But I think with him, having him overly confident, riding off of the first film's success of what he does, but also wanting deep down to have a strong relationship with someone, I think that's a good direction to take with someone like him, and the moments between him and Ben are enjoyable and will sometimes have a heartfelt moment, which is what I want out of the Fantastic Four film. And I think Silver Surfer's arc could have gone somewhere of him serving Galactus to protect his world and the person he loves, and ultimately sacrificing himself to save this one. I think there is something interesting in that arc. I just wish we could have explored more of it in the first hour of the film rather than him talking to Sue in the third act for the first time, really diving into all of that. If we had more time to flesh it out, I think there could have been a very interesting point with him and the rest of the characters as well. And that's what I think the big issue with this film is that there's a lot of emotion buried in here and potential for something really interesting and unique for a Fantastic Four film, but the problem is that we have very sloppy writing with so many plot points going on at the same time. We have Tim Story's bland direction and just 2000s campiness going all over, and being painfully slow for a 90-minute film when the first one went by pretty fast. So all of that just combines into more of a disappointing sequel rather than something I would want to see again. And that leaves us with the last Fantastic Four film that we've gotten at this point in time, which is known as Fan4stick. This is the 2015 Josh Trank directed Fox Fantastic Four film, and this is just known as one of the worst comic book movies of all time, and it honestly might be my least favorite of all time. To me, this isn't even a Fantastic Four movie. The Incredibles is more of a Fantastic Four movie than this, and that is mainly due to what Josh Trank wanted this movie to be. He went the complete opposite direction of the 2000s films, where if those are more campy, this is way overly serious to a point of just being miserable. He wanted to take this into more of a body horror direction of them having to live with their superpowers in a bad way after the accident, which to me is just not the right story for a Fantastic Four film, where there's a lot of production issues where we didn't really get to see his full vision, but I don't know how much better that would be than what we got, and not really a Zack Snyder situation where his Justice League was far better. This just doesn't feel like one of those situations. The tone is very gloomy and just joyless and nauseatingly off-putting to the point where I was just genuinely not feeling good while watching this film, and erases all the joy that we're supposed to feel from watching a Fantastic Four film by being way overly serious and depressing, where it feels like it's trying way too hard to be like Christopher Nolan or an even edgier Zack Snyder after Man of Steel and the Dark Knight trilogy being big, and the poor response to the 2000s films. But in the end, it just feels like Stormcloud the movie, which feels kind of relevant for Fantastic Four. But beyond that, it also tries to force in Avengers-level humor, which was the blueprint for some other people in production for this film of what this could have been, but Josh Trank's very gloomy version did not fit Avengers humor, so all of it just feels mismatched in the same movie. And the movie just doesn't understand why we fell in love with these characters in the first place, where all of them are just devoid of charm and personality, where we lose a lot of one-liners from Johnny, and Reed just isn't really playfully arrogant at all. So what makes these characters great just isn't felt here in any sense. We have zero family dynamic at all, and the characters feel more like a forced school project rather than a superhero family, which just takes away any heart and emotion this film would have had if they even tried. And then Doctor Doom, that I just don't think they've gotten him right on the big screen at all, where he's only in here for 10 minutes of the film as Doctor Doom, and he just doesn't really do anything. He just comes back and is like, you guys finally found me, and then he's on a rampage through everything and he's just easily defeated. So he just doesn't really feel like a true villain. He just feels like the butt of the joke getting mad at the school project. But nothing involving anything, the powers, the setup, any emotion there could have been, and the resolution, none of it feels earned because they didn't figure out how to give character depth to anyone and create a story that we actually care about. It just comes off as a very mean-spirited, nasty, distasteful viewing that you just never, ever want to watch again. So what does all of this mean for Fantastic Four First Steps, and what can this movie do differently? So the first thing that I think this movie would have to do to separate itself from the others is absolutely nail the family dynamic. This is Marvel's first family, and this is the core of what makes this group work super well. So the casting all needs to have chemistry, and they need to write in a very compelling romance between Reed and Sue, and figure out how they're going to have everyone play off of each other with playful banter that works, and create emotion between all of them. And based off what we've seen from the trailers, I think they're going to get that pretty well. And then we get into the mood and tone. The 90s didn't really have one, it was just made to get made. The 2000s was very campy, and the 2010s was overly serious, so they need to figure out how to balance this out to where they can have those silly moments that we get from the comics while also balancing emotion and giving us those heartfelt moments that we've lacked in the previous films. Some prime examples that I think would be a good blueprint for this movie to take on would be The Incredibles, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, and then Superman the movie with Christopher Reeve. Those three movies blend all of that perfectly and are known as some of the best superhero movies of all time due to that. So look at what these three did, and I hope this movie can follow that up. And again, based off the trailers and what initial reactions are saying, this movie seems to have done just that. And then another huge thing that I think this movie needs to nail is style. We don't want it to blend in with other movies of the era. We don't want it to be another forgotten MCU film. We want it to stand out as its own Fantastic Four film inside of the MCU. And I think the retro style they're going with by putting these characters into the 1960s where they've originated, and going for this retro WandaVision style by getting the director, Matt Shakman, of that show, I think that is the perfect way to go about all of that. Bringing us back to that sort of thing, I think is genius for a Fantastic Four film. Now those are the three big things, but I think another thing I want brought up is having stakes in this. I think Silver Surfer needs to have a daunting presence of the person that is coming to Earth to say that your world is ending, and then Galactus needs to have devastation shown for what he has done to really establish this guy is the real deal and is one of the biggest threats in the MCU since Thanos. We need to have that prior knowledge of Galactus in this film rather than just showing a storm cloud blowing up a planet like in the beginning of Rise of Silver Surfer. And then we also need this movie to really nail in that it feels like it is the end of the world and that everyone could die. I don't think we felt that in Rise of Silver Surfer, so I think this movie has to get that down for, yeah, we could lose these four characters immediately, so we need to have that level of emotional involvement. But most importantly, I want this movie to be very fun, and I want it to be emotionally investing. I'm not asking for this to be avant-garde. I'm not asking it to be like Thunderbolts taking on a serious topic like mental health. I just want a very silly but emotional film starring the Fantastic Four that will set them up very well for the MCU. And that's what I think First Steps needs to do to be the best Fantastic Four movie that we have seen thus far. It's not that the Fantastic Four is impossible to adapt on the big screen. If they've been able to find a home in our hearts for 60 plus years, they can easily find a home on the silver screen. Thank you all for watching this video about the Fantastic Four films. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and give your thoughts on how excited you are for First Steps and what are your expectations going into it. Make sure to subscribe to get more videos like this revolving around superheroes and cinema as a whole in the future. And with that said, goodbye.